passion for what you're doing. This rings true because it's so hard that if you don't, any rational person would give up. It's really hard, and you have to do it over a sustained period of time. So if you don't love it, and if you're not having fun doing it, you're gonna give up.
Welcome to another episode of John's Entitled Podcast, a partner of MoshPitNation.com. This week's guest is Rob Blasko Nicholson, the band manager for such bands as In This Moment, Black Veil Brides, Andy Biersack, vocalist of Black Veil Brides, and podcaster extraordinaire. He is the co-host of Managemental with Mike Mowery of Outer Loop Management, as well as his brand new podcast, A New Level podcast, where he talks to a lot of industry folk, and it's really good. But joining me now is my new co-host, Daniel Terry. How are you doing?
Oh, man, pretty good. I'm stoked, man. I've been listening to this podcast for the past 24 hours, so.
Yeah, it's kind of different being able to binge listen to a podcast, isn't it?
It is. It's like Netflix, you know, like they drop a new season of whatever, and you're like, all right, man, I'm cancel all my appointments for the next 2 days, you know.
Yeah, I've been currently binge listening A New Level podcast while also binge watching Glow Season 2. Was pleasantly surprised with this podcast. When someone says that, they're kind of changing the format, because typically only, scripted podcasts are really the only ones that drop, episodes all at once. So it was kind of refreshing to get a podcast like this, where, and I think it's smart, and, I'm interested to talk to Blasko about, the concept of dropping everything all at once versus putting out weekly episodes or whatever. Because, when you get into a new podcast, it's almost the inherent nature to just binge listen all the back catalog that you didn't know existed until you found that one episode that got you in. So I don't know if that was kind of the reasoning behind it or what, but
yeah, I'm not sure either. I'll be interested to find out what the answer to that is, because it's kind of nice too with them being like little 30-minute episodes. Like I definitely didn't feel bogged down. You know what I mean? It was just like on to the next thing, on to the next thing, on to the next thing, and that was cool. A little bit faster paced than what we're used to.
I think Rob does a great job of keeping everything fresh and interesting and asking questions as someone who knows, who has spent a lot of time in the industry, but also as someone who can, for lack of a better word, dumb it down for the rest of us to kind of understand what they're talking about.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. I just liked the industry insight that I think sometimes we don't get with other podcasts. There's a little bit more like real practical advice, and I think that's just because Blasko's friends with these people. Like he's just calling his buddies up and having these conversations. So I think they kind of come across as a little bit more sincere. You know what I mean? They're not necessarily watching what they say and that sort of thing. And it's not trash talk. It's all incredibly positive, which I actually find kind of refreshing, to be honest.
The thing that I think was kind of interesting, and I know hopefully we'll get into it with Blasko, is, in listening to these conversations, there's someone like Scott Lee. To me, Scott Lee was always like a big name in the hardcore scene, between him working at the Palladium in Massachusetts, in Westchester. And, it's one of those things, like, that's a name for me that's iconic, and it always has been in the metal hardcore community for the last decade plus. And, and to see, to have been following him for so long and see that, now that he's the vice president or the co-owner of Soundrink, which is basically a new form of a way for bands to make money with like the VIP meet and greets and so forth. Like that's basically a new revenue stream for a lot of bands to make money where revenue streams are dying up. So it's interesting to see, for me, being a fan of this scene, someone that's been a part of it and like always kind of finding new ways to put the bands that, he loves and are friends with and so forth, that he's still actively finding ways to promote and be a part of this music scene, even though he's like out of the booking aspect of things.
Yeah, it's really cool. And it's funny too, because I think a lot of these other forms of promotion, like these kind of, we call them new forms of promotion. They're not new necessarily, but it's one of those things where a lot, while people were still cashing in on CD sales, like all that stuff was just kind of like window dressing.
Yeah.
And now we're actually looking at some of these promotion methods as being like actually the main money makers for a lot of these bands, and it's what keeps them on the road and keeps them doing what they're doing. And I think that's pretty cool. Like that they were creative enough to be like, no, we don't necessarily have to change up what we do. We're already great at promoting. It's not our fault that CDs aren't selling anymore. It's just the way people are now. So I thought it was really cool, seeing these like seeing bands get better on like these meet and greets and doing like these weird commercials, and like you had a Hailstorm on a Budweiser commercial, and then suddenly they're huge, just stuff like that. You really didn't see that for a little while, and now it's kind of cool that it's coming back.
Well, I think that's a good as place as any to kind of wrap up our intro thing and get ready to go right into our chat with Blasko, who maybe can offer us more insight into some of these questions we have as fans and sort of, I guess, media as well. So let's get into our chat with Blasko.
Yes, let's.
Hello.
Hey, what's up?
What's up, man?
All right, well, finally got this to work.
Nice. Very cool, man. Very cool. You hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine. Are you able to hear us good?
Yep, absolutely.
Loud and clear. Cool.
All right, and we're hopefully going to get like about 35 minutes or so with you. Is that cool, or do you have to be somewhere at a certain time?
Nope, I was already somewhere, so I'm good now.
Okay, we're
Cool.
figuring that we would try to keep it new level-esque at about 35, 40 minutes.
Yeah, perfect. Nice.
Apparently that is
Excellent.
the excellent time management to get to a new level is 35, 40 minutes. If it takes any more, then you are not at a new level.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I it's kind of like, it's interesting because Mike and I have another podcast called Managemental, and so like sort of the history of that time frame kind of came down to like we did demos like at first, like Mike and I were like, oh, we should do a podcast, right? And so we kind of didn't know what the fuck we were doing, and so we just like it was like two guys riffing like about the music business like endlessly with no direction. What, you know what I mean? Like it was kind of like, oh, well, let's talk about this. Oh, here's this other thing. Let's talk about this. And it was just like, and you listen back and you go, this sucks, man. Like it's just like rambling, directionless, and you're like, it's too long, And like I noticed that whenever like I look at a podcast, like if I just like I'm like, oh yeah, like I heard someone look at that or mention it, and then I look at it like on iTunes and I see the episodes are like an hour long, I forget it, man. Fuck, like no way. And like I just don't got that kind of time to invest, you know what I mean? Like Joe Rogan's podcast, not happening. Like 2-hour episodes. I'm like I don't like where do I have an extra 2 hours? Like I don't. And So I looked at like podcasts that like I that I listened to, and they were all short. They were like Entrepreneurs on Fire is like 20 minutes, and $100 MBA is like 10 minutes. And I was like, man, like we gotta figure, like we gotta retool it. I narrowed it down, and I go, okay, this is what's gonna happen. Like we're gonna focus on one topic, and it's going to be 30 minutes, like max. And that's what we've been doing for like, a year and a half or whatever. And it's working out great. So whenever a new level, like whenever I went into that, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to model it after Entrepreneurs on Fire. It's going to be formatted in that everybody kind of gets the same questions. And, obviously those questions lead to additional questions, but the format is the same. And I was like, but they have to be like, 20, 30 minutes. Like that was the idea. And then I recorded my first episode with Ryan Downey for a new level, and it was fucking 2 hours. That was the first one. Yeah, and I was like, well, I might have to overthink this, but I just had my guy like edit it down to 30 minutes. So whenever I track them, they all tend to be like, 45 minutes or so, so and so I just edit it down to 30 minutes, and then after the fact I realized that John Lee Dumas, like Entrepreneurs on Fire, like even though his are were 20 minutes and stuff, like his conversations were longer, he just edited it down. So I was like, oh, okay, cool. Well, like I'm in the ballpark. It's not like everything's going to work out perfectly for me every time, So, but anyway, that's the long-winded story of how 30 minutes came to be.
No, I mean, I think it's a good amount of time, and just kind of like almost the difference between, to kind of correlate it to music, an EP versus like a long full length album. A lot of times, like an EP should hopefully by the time it's done make you go like, fuck, I want more of that. Whereas sometimes an album like that new Drake record at 25 tracks, you're like, fuck, dude, no one told you that like probably 12 of these tracks probably could have been scrapped or reworked, or hey, maybe that just is another album for another time, not to drop all at once.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I just kind of look at it as like, who is going to invest that kind of time and who has that kind of time. I figure it's like, for Managemental or even for a new level is a new level. I mean, Managemental is specifically music business education, but like a new level is a little, it could be viewed as educational depending on how it is that you're listening to it. But I just figure it's like, man, like 30 minutes is like, an average drive time or an average time that you're doing something to where you can commit to 30 minutes. But anything longer to that seems like you're kind of like you're overstepping your boundaries of what's in good taste, of what you feel like your audience is really capable of enjoying. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I'm just taking notes, man. I do another podcast, and we've gone like 3 hours before, but it's a little different though in that we're not educating people necessarily. We just talk about bands like their whole, like if you're talking about a band like Napalm Death, it's going to take 3 hours to get there. But
sure, yeah, no doubt.
So I kind of wanted to ask you. I mean, first of all, I want to say congrats on the very overwhelming success that the podcast has had in the last couple of days since you dropped it, literally as a whole. And I kind of wanted to know, where did the concept of dropping a season come about?
It was a combination of Pat Flynn. Pat Flynn, I don't know if you guys know who Pat Flynn is, but he's sort of like the guru of podcasting in a lot of ways. And he has podcasts that he drops in season. So inspirationally, it came from that, as well as Jabberjaw. Jabberjaw is my media hosting partner, and they were like, man, like we should drop this in as a season as opposed to one at a time. And I was like, oh, okay, well, Pat Flynn, he does that, and then John Lee Dumas, he actually suggested that to whenever you first drop a podcast, to drop at least 3 episodes out of the gate. And the reasoning behind the 3 episodes, or at least 3 episodes, is that you have more ability to get more downloads, which then provides you the opportunity to get into new and noteworthy on Apple Podcasts, right? So, and I mean, I kind of think that that's partially the reason why I was able to debut at number 19 and climb up to number 17 on the music business podcast, or the music podcast charts, is because there was multiple people listening to multiple episodes. If it was just one episode, I probably would have never got anywhere near that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it's definitely an interesting thing. In kind of trying to pick it apart, it was kind of, is it because we're also more in a binging type society now? Like we know with, I was making a reference to my co-host Dan here, that between binging, your podcast, I was also binge watching season 2 of Glow. So it's like I was literally binge watching something while binge listening to something the last couple of days. And it's one of those where it's kind of nice, but I kind of have wondered, is the downfall maybe that, you know, you're going to see a huge spike right away, and then until season 2, you're going to kind of see it trail off until, you know, the tease of season 2 is coming, where people are like, oh shit, I need to go back and listen to a couple episodes and kind of, you know, get back reacquainted with this thing.
Yeah, potentially, but I also feel like, you know, the strategy is that doing interviews and driving awareness to it over time, word of mouth, building it up, so that whenever someone does find it, that they can just attach themselves to the content rather than have to worry about subscribing and checking and like, oh, there's a new episode, you know, now or whatever. It's, you know, I mean, it's kind of like, it's debatable one way or the other. But like, it just kind of made sense. Like, kind of like you said, it's like, you know, like for instance, like when we talk about Netflix binging, my favorite show on Netflix, it was this show called American Vandal.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about, you know, 10 episodes, and I binged it all in a weekend, and it was amazing. But like, there's nothing for me to then now deal with other than watch the season again or wait for the second season. So I just kind of feel like it's the balance of, well, you have to make a decision one way or the other, and whatever decision that is that you make, you just have to commit to it. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like, you know, that's just what we decided to do. And, you know, I'm sure that, you know, whatever, either way it could have worked out. But to me, that this made sense of like, because of the type of content that it is, to drive traffic to it, for someone and people to be able to binge through it over the course of the 4th of July weekend or whatever, just timing wise, kind of in my mind made sense.
Mm-hmm. I'm kind of wondering too, you know, this podcast I've been doing for a little over a year now, and obviously I'm seeing a growth exponentially the last couple of months. Surprisingly to me, I don't really know what I'm doing to cause it, but
right.
You know, and kind of thinking about how long you've been doing, you know, Managemental and now with a new level, as well as being a guest on a lot of, you know, popular podcasts like Jamie Josta's show and so forth. Have you noticed how much the podcast game has changed in the last little while?
It's crazy. I mean, you know, I mean, whenever I first heard someone talking about podcasts, like I don't even know that I understood exactly what it was, and I don't think really most people did. And to see them come to the point to where they're at now, whereas, you know, it was like, oh, it was people talking, you're recording a conversation, it's an interview. In a lot of ways, it seems so basic. But the cool thing about podcasting is now we have things like lore, right? Or serial. Mm-hmm. And people are taking the platform into such, it's sort of like, it's unwritten. There's so much room for innovation. You know, it's like, whereas like in metal music, I almost feel like every riff has been written, whereas in podcasting, like every riff hasn't been written yet. You know, it's undetermined. Like when you look at, for instance, like the Marvel did the Wolverine podcast, and that's exclusive to Stitcher. You know, I mean, and just like, oh wow, what, like it's just, there's so much room for innovation now in the podcasting world. It's such an exciting place to be, that you're just like, wow, it's just so cool. And then it's overwhelming the amount of content that's out there, man. It's like, if you surf around, like, you know, like Apple Podcasts, like all the different genres that it's in and everything, you're like, oh wow, I don't even know where to begin. It's insane. So I think what's cool about it is how far it's come, but not only that, but it's how far will it go? How far will people take it? That's what's interesting to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about it too is, you know, part of the reason why it's been such a boom. I mean, I remember the first podcast I ever listened to. It was some crappy video game podcast or something, you know. And I remember I had to download the podcast on iTunes on my computer.
Right.
And then I had to plug a cable into my iPod because at that time I had an iPod and like a flip phone, and then I had to plug it in, and then I had to go into iTunes, wait for iTunes to recognize the iPod, and then I'd had to transfer every episode I wanted to listen to onto that. And Grandma's not going to do that, but in 2018, Grandma's just hitting a button and subscribing to whatever she wants,
Yeah.
And it's been huge, and that's man, it's just crazy how it's exploded. But I think one of the things that it's affected the most has been kind of like like as far as the music industry goes, like band perceptions, like how bands are portrayed to everybody else. Because I mean, years ago, you could hear a band and think that they were really cool, but if you didn't know them or know anything about them, there's certain things, about the way they act or how they treated people and things like that don't really come to life. And I've kind of noticed as podcasting has taken off, you're starting to kind of get the real deal, with some of these interviews. And I guess the question I have for you, Blasko, is, if there is anything that's changed in how bands, self-promote, do you feel like now that everything's kind of out in the open, that people that were maybe less professional back in the day and got away with it, can really get away with it now? And obviously, I'm not asking for like specific names of bands or anything, but just like do you think that with the way promotion is now, that bands kind of have to almost kind of watch their behavior a little bit?
Oh, without a doubt. Are you kidding me? I mean, how many careers have been ended from people not being careful of what they say? And to me, it's like bewildering. Of like, you realize that this is the World Wide Web, right? Like you realize that everyone knows what you're saying. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah.
It's unbelievable, but yeah, I mean, I in some ways I'd like to think that a lot of us can learn from other people's mistakes in that regard, of like, man, we're not immune to this. If someone else can ruin their own career by saying some shit about a previous president, and and like refer to him as an animal, like let's just not do that. Like let's not get in the habit of doing things like that, because that is a career ender. So yes, of course we have to be aware and cautious, and know that someone's quick to someone's quick to judge you, and not only that too, but it's like, I think there's certain things that rock bands potentially need to stay away from, unless of course their careers were built on taking a specific stance on a specific issue. But by and large, man, I feel like we should stay away from things like politics and religion. It's like it's not really, like no one really cares, and our words aren't really going to change anything just by saying an opinion, if it's really going to be that overly divisive, and you're potentially going to cut off like a big percentage of your fan base. You know what I mean? Like a lot of people, when we're talking about these types of issues, you're kind of splitting the world down the middle, right? That are going to be one way or the other, and view the world from the dark side or the light side. And if you, as a rock band, take a stance from the light side, then you're eliminating your fans from the dark side, and that's kind of counterproductive, in my opinion. So but yes, I think that's a long-winded answer to your question of like, yeah, people have to be cautious of what they say. I mean, it's just the reality of the world that we're living in.
On the flip side of that, though, I do wonder, because I've had a few headline-making statements made on here, which kind of was shocking. It makes me wonder if potentially somebody else in an industry, in the music industry, might be like, wow, that could be a hot take that could get my band in the headlines and so forth. Do you think that bands or individuals might try to use the sort of shittiness of making a headline like that just to kind of help promote an album? Because there is no such thing as bad publicity.
I mean, you'd have to have a very, intelligent, forward-thinking, chance-taking musician to go like, I'm gonna say some shit, and I'm gonna say some shit in an interview or in a podcast, and it's gonna end up as a blabbermouth headline, and it's gonna get me a bunch of press. I I feel like I don't feel like by and large people generally take those types of risks calculated.
Mhm.
And if they do, uh, it potentially is maybe a little bit more obvious, because it's like to me, it's a little selfish if that's the plan. If you're in a band, right? Like you've got 3 to 4 other people that you're on the same team with. So it seems a little selfish to do something that's going to shine a negative light on you for the sake of cheap press whenever you have other people that may or may not agree with you that are on the same team that have been like, whoa, man, like it would have been cool if you would have consulted with us before you talk some shit about other people just to get a headline.
Right.
In a best case scenario, you cut your fan base in half.
Yeah, I mean, that's a terrible idea.
I also think that you would have to be like really into analytics. Like you'd have to basically formulate an opinion on an issue that you knew that the majority of people actually held versus whatever the popular opinion was. It's kind of one of those like if you're smart enough to be the guy that says what everyone's thinking, you might be able to get away with it. But I think that requires a level of knowledge that I think your average musician is too busy to really obtain.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, I doubt that the majority of people go into a situation like this with the intent of capturing a headline for, free press. That seems I would bet that is generally unlikely.
Whew, yeah, that's it's definitely one of those things where I think I've seen people get away with it, but like I don't know, it's rough, yeah, I couldn't imagine. I think also to kind of go back to the whole changes in the music industry. Part of it is that like I think years ago you didn't necessarily have to rely on that as much. To rely on trying to get headlines, and because I feel like everybody's trying to make that presence online. But one of the things that I really, one of the things that I was kind of wondering what your opinion was, because I binged this podcast in about 3 days, all 10 episodes, and
nice. Thank you.
Yeah, I feel so much smarter now that I have, because that's the thing. Like I'm a guy that talks about the music industry, but like my exposure to it is very limited, in comparison to you and in comparison to the guys that you're talking to, so it's nice to have that, that real life perspective. And, some of my perspective ended up being confirmed by listening to those episodes, but then other ones I was like, oh wow, I was way off on that,
Yeah.
So, but one of the things, that I'm wondering too, is like, you take like an older band, that maybe got popular in the 80s and 90s, how, in your experience, are those bands adjusting to kind of the new frontier of self-promotion? Because there's a lot more self-promotion required now from bands that I feel like, I mean, obviously when everybody started in the 80s and 90s, they were sticking flyers up and, on telephone poles and, you know what I mean? Like they were throwing flyers all over and doing all that stuff starting out. But once it seemed like back in the day, once you got signed to a label that believed in you, then they kind of just took it from there, like kind of a, sit back, we'll do all the work kind of situation. And I'm wondering now, in your experience, if you've seen any of the older bands kind of faltering in that regard, like if they're trying to like fall back on the old way of doing things, or if it's the new methods are being adopted better by older bands.
Well, I mean, it's general, right? I mean, it's a broad stroke question, but I understand where you're coming from. And, it is the idea that, is it tough to adapt for people that started their career in a different in a different time, in a different era. But it's a matter of, to me, it's as simple as being able to adapt and take a look around you and do it. Like, I put out my first record in 1985, right? And here I am, multiple podcasts. I'm on tour in Barcelona, and I'm in Spain right now doing this interview, headlining festivals, across the world with Ozzy Osbourne and stuff. And so it's like, what's the difference of me or, like, say, an 80s band, right? Like, I have the same skill set as some cock rock band that put out their record in the 80s. You know what I mean? And just because I was in Cryptic Slaughter, why am I more adaptable than someone else is? You know what I mean? So, like, I've been given the same tools to work with as anybody else. But here I am, and then potentially someone else is in a different position, right? So, I don't know, man. It's I mean, I don't know that I have a specific answer for that, but it's just like anything. I mean, look, is there lazy dudes in bands? Fuck yeah, man, all day long. And is there smart dudes in bands that know how to, like, work the system? Yeah, there's a few of those too, and stuff. So I don't know that there's a specific answer, but are there bands that can adapt to the digital age, and are there bands that can't adapt? Yes, absolutely, all day long.
Gotcha. No, that's good. I mean, I obviously it's I always try to come up with questions that are gonna, be a little not have a specific answer, and the reason for that is just because, I think that with those with the changing of times and stuff, what I've actually noticed, as a counterpoint to that, is I've noticed that, like, the older bands that I have seen have adopted to the new systems a little bit better than some of the new bands that are cropping up that still think that the old way, like you get signed to a record label and all your dreams will come true, kind of thing.
It is interesting how I see that attitude in young bands. Like, you're right. Like, and I go, like, how is this even in your mind that you think that this is how this works? Like, it's right. It's insane for me to see that.
I saw this movie once. Yeah, like, that sort of mindset. Yeah.
Well, I think that kind of speaks to what we were saying earlier. Sorry to cut you off. What we were saying earlier about how, people don't want to kind of put in the work. They just want someone to go, oh, you just follow steps A, B, C, and D. And I mean, I think I don't remember if it was the Ash Appleton episode or the episode with Mike, where, you guys were talking about how it was you making the comment that, being a rock star and being a movie star are two of the hardest fucking things to do in the world. And if people think it's so fucking easy, and it's not. And, like, my wife, when I made her listen to some of the episodes, she just laughed at that. And she was like, people do think it's so easy now. Like, people aren't willing to put in the work. And I think that's honestly a big part of this cultural shift. I mean, I know you were in a band getting signed when I was a year old, but I mean, I think I'm kind of the last generation that remembers what life was like before the internet, where you had to, like, find things to do, and anything you wanted, you had to bust your ass to get it. Like, I just saw on Facebook popped up a post I made a couple years ago where it was like I was recounting when I had to corn to tassel for a whole fucking summer just so I could afford to buy a PlayStation when it first came out. And my dad asked me when I spent all the money I had just made working for a full summer, and he goes, was it worth it? And I go, yes, but I'm never fucking doing that ever again. And, I was like, I'll find some other way to make money where I don't have to work that hard. And he goes, well, it was a valuable lesson then, because you learned that you need to learn how to work hard or smarter, not harder.
Right.
And I don't feel like kids nowadays have that for a multitude of reasons.
Get off my lawn.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, I don't know that it's a generational thing. I mean, from my perspective, it's just a musician thing. It's like, look, like when I was in a band in the 80s, I was in a band. It was me and 3 other guys, and I'm the only guy still doing this. right? Like the other guys, like all went off to do other stuff and whatever. Like whenever we, all graduated high school in 1988, right? Like they all went off to do different things. Like I'm the only guy that was stupid enough to chase the rock and roll dream, right? And just because I chased it didn't mean that I was going to end up being the guy that I am today. I mean, quite possibly that wasn't going to happen. But I followed my dreams. I followed my passion. I did things that I thought were the right things to do to gain forward momentum and gain progress. And, sometimes that worked and sometimes it didn't. But I mean, it's like, man, there's so many people that just get sidelined by distractions and they just lose perspective, and it's unfortunate. But I mean, man, I grew up and was in bands with and worked with some really talented people that for whatever reason it just didn't work out for them. They get distracted by real life, real, like, whatever. It's like, having kids, getting into drugs, getting into drinking, it's like whatever multitude of distractions there are, being, family pressures of having to have a real job. And, like I faced all that shit too, man, and if you listen to, like the Tim Bohr episode, Tim Bohr's like, he was like, whatever, really young, like 18, 19, he just had a kid, and he was like, man, I had to figure something out. But he had a passion and went for it. And, here he is. He's like, one of the biggest booking agents in the genre and stuff. And so, it's like, and I think the theme throughout the podcast is really just not being distracted and having a passion for what this is and really embracing that passion and not being allowed to be distracted from what your goal is. And that's the commonality of everyone that I interviewed is that they definitely didn't get into music because they thought they were going to make a quick buck. Like they just loved heavy metal and they wanted a career in the business, and they started off small and worked their way up, and yeah, I mean, it's a matter of putting in the work, like you said, but it is working smarter and not harder in that it's like, I always kind of feel like whenever people ask me about like, like, oh, what do I got to do? And whenever I say the word work, like I feel like I'm losing them. Right. Like I feel like it's just, I can just see the hamster like turning the wheel in their brain of like, just like, oh man, like I gotta get like work is such a big scary word. And so whenever I say, work, like I don't mean like, tarring a roof in the summertime, having to get up at 6 a.m. and dig ditches. Like, that's not what I mean by work. I mean, look, at the end of the day, all of us reached a level of success in the music business because we loved what we were doing. And at no point did we feel like it was equivalent to digging ditches. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, oh, hold on.
You want your food? No, for sure.
Hold on, there's some Girl Scout cookies trying to be sold. So a question, that Dan, between his other podcast, like he was saying earlier, where they break down bands' discographies. It's called Discography Discussion. Great title, I know. But we ended up doing an episode a while back on the As Lay Dying dudes, and it was, unbeknownst to us, it was about a week before everything happened, and then we did a follow-up based on this clip that aired, the 30-second clip or so. And, something we've been talking about since then, just as fans, but just kind of as people, I guess, sort of that read a lot of press and media and so forth. From your perspective of being a band manager as well as having a podcast where you talk about these kind of things, and if you have already gotten to it, I will self-admittedly say I'm about 4 or 5 episodes behind on Managemental. But I'm very
Amateur.
I know. I'm intrigued. There's, like you said earlier, there's only so much time you have in a
Yeah,
day.
there is, man. Totally.
But it's one of those things to me where the business side of what's happening with them is so unique and interesting to me as not only as a fan, but just kind of someone who loves learning about, the music business aspect of things. And something I've been and I know you talked with Brian Slagle, and he made a comment which now looking back has made me wonder if he was talking about, basically As I Lay Dying coming back with something else. Because he said that, it'll be revealed in a few months. I don't know when this is coming out. Probably by the time this comes out, people might already know what it is. And I don't know if that's what it was or not, but it's one of those things in thinking back to that conversation and just what's been going on with them, and knowing that I'd be talking with you, how would you approach what's been going on with that band? Because I feel like it's just uncharted territory. Like there's so many questions that I would have, like how do you try to repair an image of a band that went through what they went through, and what does it look like when you're trying to roll out a plan of like, okay, so we're gonna put out a teaser song and so forth and all that. It's like, and a lot of fans were shitting on, I don't necessarily know Metal Blade per se, but the band for not putting out the interview that they put out after the song. And it just kind of makes me wonder, like, with you, what would you have done in that situation? Or do you think there was a better way to maybe tackle that?
Well, I mean, look, to answer the question completely on the level, and honestly, I wouldn't have been in that situation. Just because I would have had to distance myself from it. Like I just honestly, I just, my values aren't aligned with that. And no matter how much you can have a sake of forgiveness for somebody, at the end of the day, this is business. And my business values don't align with that situation. And I would not have found myself in a position to have to try and rebuild someone's career coming off of a situation like that. Unfortunately, I just don't have a specific answer of what I would have done. I wouldn't have done anything in that situation.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting because as Dan and I were talking earlier, I had made the comment, I wonder if the re-releasing the band's back catalog on vinyl, like I know Metal Blade's a big vinyl label anyway, so that's not a big shock, but it made me kind of wonder in retrospect now of being like, oh, was this a thing to test the waters to see how financially viable the band still is, even if it's only their back catalog, which arguably, if they were to come back, that's kind of what they're probably going to be touting anyway in any touring capacity or whatever. But it's just, I don't know, it's just kind of weird to kind of look at this thing from a business perspective and just kind of being like, man, how the fuck would you tackle this? Because it doesn't seem like there's any right or wrong way to do it, but there also seems to be a lot of right or wrong ways to do something where when you finally see it, you're like, oh, I don't know if I would have done that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, look, the people involved have, they're involved on whatever level that they are, and I can't speak on it. It's like Slagle's a good friend, and he's a business owner, and so whatever he thought was the right thing to do for his business regarding an artist that he has signed to his label. I'm sure that he had some serious debates internally about what the right thing to do was, and he made his decisions, and they did what they did, and that's on them. It's totally their decision, and I don't fault anybody for having to do whatever it is that they got to do that they feel is the right decision based on all their internal conversations, given the scope of the situation.
Yeah, that's a rough one, man. I've spent probably 5 hours talking about that, and it's oh man, yeah, it's just a messed up situation all around. But I think everybody's doing the best they can, despite it. And that just goes to show you too, though, kind of like, I kind of feel like, this is a little off off of that subject specifically, but one thing that I really thought shined through on your podcast, especially that I don't really hear very much with industry insiders, is the love for the music. You know, the love for the bands, what they've done, what they've put out, what they've gone through. A lot of the times, I think when we think of industry insiders, it's, you know, you're thinking of people that are just cold, calculated, money grabbing people. And I think that's what kind of made your podcast interesting to me, was that you know, your guests that you had on were very positive. Like it's the most positive inner music industry podcast that I've heard. And I think a lot of the times it's really easy to focus on the negatives of what's going on. But I mean, in a certain sense, like, you really captured it as far as, like, there's a reason all these dudes are in the positions that they're in. And it's not because it was a good paycheck all the time. You know what I mean?
No. Yeah. No, and that, I'm really happy that you took that out of the 10 episodes, because even though, here's the thing, like, everybody that I interviewed, I know personally, but I didn't necessarily know their own entrepreneurial journey from start to finish, right? Like, I didn't know the inner workings, other than, like, I've known these people for a long time and I've worked with them, but, like, I never necessarily had the time to sit down and really kind of talk to them like I did on the podcast. And so that passion that you pulled out of that was really a happy accident, because, like I said, like, I knew that all these people were passionate about what they did, but I didn't necessarily intend that was going to be a commonality amongst all of them going into it, right? Like, I mean, I knew that it was, but I didn't know necessarily that it was going to resonate as much as that it had. And I really find that to be a really additional positive bonus of the episodes when you listen to it, that I'm happy that you acknowledged and that you noticed.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's one of those things. It's like, it's so easy to be negative and down and be like, oh, well, this band was so, you know, they were hard to get along with, or, you know, I had to put up with all these dumb requests from people all the time. And it's not like that stuff isn't real. It's not like that stuff isn't happening. But it's nice to see that they were comfortable enough with you to talk about the things that they really enjoyed and that they loved. And yeah, I mean, I definitely got a lot out of that, and you know, I think it's cool. I liked that I got to listen to, you know, 10 episodes all at once, versus, you know, because, like, I mean, I just was told about the podcast, I mean, probably like 3 or 4 days ago, you know, and to be able to sit down and listen and, you know, and really dissect and get some ideas and stuff. And but yeah, that was definitely the prevailing feeling I had, was just this kind of positivity of, like, yeah, the music industry's changed, but it's okay. You know, like,
yeah,
we're going with it, you know? And I thought that was really cool. And one of the things that we noticed too is that, you know, I definitely enjoy the kind of the rock solid format. So what me and John are going to do now is we're going to flip the table on you a little bit, and we're going to ask you some of the questions that you ask your guests.
Perfect.
Yeah. So, you know, that's the plot twist of the episode.
That's great.
John, you want to start off? I know you've got a couple.
All right. So you always like to end your episodes with forming a supergroup, a band that that person would like to see. So in thinking about a different way to ask that question, because I'm sure we're not going to be the only clever podcasters to use your own thing to end the episode with. So my thing that I came up with was, what would be your supergroup of music industry people?
Oh, interesting. My super team.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay, that is a good one. All right. Well, so in this hypothetical, it's my band, right? And I'm building a team. I'm building a team around my band. So who would be my perfect team?
Mm-hmm.
So I have to say my attorney is going to be Dina LaPolte, because she is a raging pit bull. And that's what your attorney should be. And then, so my manager, I wonder who my manager would be. Part of me thinks that it's going to be Rick Sales because he manages Slayer, and Slayer is my favorite band of all time. So I'm going to have to say that's probably the case. And then who would be the booking agent? The booking agent, well, I feel like Tim Bohr would be the agent, except for that's kind of not really that fun of a hypothetical because he books all my bands anyway. Right. So let me get back to that one. Well, you know what's interesting is Rod McSween, he books Ozzy, right? But like, I'm a hired gun in Ozzy. So if this is my band, Rod McSween manages some of the biggest bands. Like he books like Kiss and Guns N' Roses and Ozzy, and it's like the list goes on. It's mega, right? So I feel like maybe he's got some favors that he could pull, to kind of make some fucking crazy next level shit happen. So I'd probably maybe go with him as the agent. So there's the agent, the attorney, the manager. Who else do we got on the team? Who else would it be? Like maybe like the label, like what label would I want to be on? Ooh. And I would say, ooh, that's a tough one. And you know what, man? My honest answer in this day and age is I would self-release through AWOL.
Okay.
I wouldn't sign to a label. And then I would hire out any, outside things like, say, a publicist, right? Mm-hmm. And I'd probably have to look into what would be the right publicist for that. So, there's a lot to choose from in that world. I don't know on that one, but yeah, that's is that everybody?
I think that's a pretty solid team, regardless. I mean, obviously, and those who have listened to your podcast or Managemental, I think, have learned that there's so many pieces to the machine that keep it all going that people aren't even aware of.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no doubt.
All right, so I got one. I think this will probably be our closing because I know time is passing, despite how much I don't want it to. Blasko, what are you fired up about right now?
I'm fired up that I did this podcast, and I'll tell you why. Because I have an overactive creative mind, and there isn't a day that goes by that I don't think of doing something, starting a religion, starting a clothing company. So like, you know what I mean? Like my brain is just overactive of like wanting to start things. Like if I watch a movie, I leave the movie wanting to make a movie, right? Like if I binge a TV show, I end up finishing the TV show with wanting to having 10 ideas for TV shows. You know what I mean? Like I remember like watching Shark Tank and just being like, fuck, like I have this great idea for like a music version of Shark Tank. And I called a bunch of people and it's just like, I can't do anything without having the answer for how it fits into my own world of creating that version of it. Right. So I'm fired up about the fact that I actually had one of these ideas, and this is specifically a New Level podcast, and that I took time because I mean, developmentally wise, it's probably 2 years in the thought process to get it to where it was real, to pull in everybody that I did. Because it's like, I mean, I think a lot of people perceive a podcast as something as like, well, like I just record some shit and put it on the internet, right? Like, isn't that a podcast? Like, yeah, I guess maybe, but no. like it's not that easy. You know what I mean? Like it's like you gotta like there's a lot more that goes into it, especially like an interview based podcast, right? That wasn't easy to do. I mean, you figure it's just like all well, you know, first of all, I gotta have a concept, right? And then I gotta track down all the people I'm going to interview, and then I gotta have someone edit it, and then I gotta have someone, you know, make the bumpers and the music and the bed, and I gotta have a vision for what it all is and everything. Like it can't just be like dudes rambling, you know what I mean? Like conceptually it has to come from a point. You have to understand your audience. You have to know where you're going, who you're going to market it to, and how exactly you're going to do that. So the fact that I was able to get past the idea phase, get into the execution phase, actually do that, get to launch phase, put it out there in the world, lands at number 17 on the iTunes music podcast charts. And then now I'm sitting here talking to you guys because I'm doing the follow through. I'm doing press on it. I'm driving traffic. I'm putting in the quote unquote work that it takes to, you know, get people to acknowledge the fact that this even exists and to listen to it and to get something out of it. So that's what I'm the most fired up about.
My last question for you is, you already mentioned that you're on Ozzy's last farewell tour, the No More Tours 2, because we already did this once in the 80s. Looking back, you know, you have the unique perspective of being a fan of Ozzy's, but now being in the band and kind of seeing a firsthand experience of watching everybody else experience this farewell tour. What has been one of your fondest memories in your time with Ozzy?
Every moment, like it's just, look, I mean, you gotta put yourself in my shoes for a second and go like, man, I was just like some dude that would like get on my BMX bike and ride to my buddy's house and across town, and we'd listen to like Blizzard of Oz and Pyromania and watch MTV and, you know, smoke weed when his parents fell asleep, and you know what I mean? Like it was like the fact that I just got back from having dinner with that guy, like now is insane to even fathom. Like
right.
it's just like it doesn't even make sense. It's like, how could I, as a kid that wasn't even a musician at that point, have been obsessing over an album that I now get to play on stage in front of thousands of people every night? Like, how is that even a possibility? You know what I mean? So yeah. It can't be one moment or one highlight. The
right.
fact that it exists night after night is unbelievably the most tremendous highlight I could even ever imagine.
Yeah. Well, that's the episode, basically. I like to usually have the guests plug their socials, where people can find you, where people can find a new level and Managemental. And then I always like to end these episodes out with a song. So what would you like us to end it out to, and maybe a quick little story about it?
Oh, wow.
You're on the spot now.
Wow. That is tough. A song with a story behind it. I don't know. Yeah. I suppose you could play Bark at the Moon, because that is the very next song I'm going to play on stage because it's the first song in the set. And so the story would be is like, after I get done with you guys, I'm going to go do a rock show and I'm going to go play Bark at the Moon. But yeah, I would do that. And then, socials is Blasko 1313. So Blasko 1313. And that's my Instagram. And on my Instagram, there's a link tree in my bio that links to everything. But my Instagram is really the main destination. And Blasko 1313 is also my Twitter and everything else. So, but yeah, Instagram. It all starts at Instagram.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for taking the time. I know it wasn't a new level time length, but greatly appreciated nonetheless.
Nah, man, we just went for it, man. It was awesome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, anytime.
Awesome.
All right. Well, enjoy rocking out over in Madrid. I think you said you're in.
I'm in Barcelona.
Barcelona.
And the next gig that we do is actually going to be in Tel Aviv, Israel. So there you go.
Awesome.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, enjoy your show. Break a leg, as they say, and looking forward to season 2 of A New Level.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Blasko.
Yep. Bye.
So that was our chat with Rob Blasko Nicholson, band manager extraordinaire and podcaster of Managemental and of A New Level podcasts. What'd you think of that chat, Dan?
Man, that was a lot of fun. Dude was super energetic, which is weird because, I mean, we were calling him, he was like in Italy.
Spain, I believe.
And it's like the middle of the night, right?
Isn't it?
Was it Spain? I thought it was Italy.
He was in Barcelona.
I don't know. I thought he said Italy, but You know
what? Just because there are people
long story
probably
short,
listening.
it was the middle of the night. No, you know what? It was no. It was Spain. It was for sure Spain.
Yeah, because I was going to say he actually was saying he was going to play a gig.
I wrote that down on my note. Calling from Spain, which I didn't realize at first until he said it, like at the very end.
Yeah. No, the only reason I knew tentatively where he was is because of his tweets and geotagging where he was, because the NSA is always after you.
Gotcha. Right.
No, I mean,
always know where you're at. But
yeah,
no, that was cool, man. He definitely, he had an answer for almost everything we had to ask him. And we got to play a little bit of game of turning his format back on him a little bit.
You know, it's funny. I really do. I would hope that we're not gonna be the only ones to have thought to do that with him in these pressers that he's gonna be doing. But I at least hope for the way I flipped his supergroup question on him. I really hope that he kind of walks away and legitimately thought it was cool, because I mean. I know you and I have been brainstorming on how to end the episode for the last couple of days, and my big thing with it was, like, I was like, and you can attest that I was very adamant. I was like, no, we got to do it this way. We're instead of like it being a band, it's a super group of like industry people, because like that's what his podcast is about. So I hope that he legitimately thought it was cool and interesting, and I'll be shocked if anyone else does that. Maybe they will after they hear this if he ends up sharing it, but I thought that was a pretty cool thing. And I think the other thing that I was pleasantly surprised with, and I hope people don't feel like I was trying to bait him into something, but the Esley Dying stuff I thought was kind of interesting, because I mean, really, like, can you think of another instance where, from a business perspective, from either being a band manager to being a label owner to being a publicist and so forth, that's had to deal with this like the Esley Dying situation has unfolded? I
don't know who signed Chris Brown.
Well, he was sort of like Esley Dying. He just got arrested again today. I don't know if you saw that.
I know, I saw that. That's why it popped into my head, because I was like, I'm sure there's other labels that have dealt with this before, but I thought his take was interesting, and it just goes to show that despite the band having what seems to be like overwhelming support, there is still a large percentage of people that are very divided on that issue, and that just goes to show you that it's not just fans. Even industry insiders are kind of like saying, like, hey, I would have washed my hands of this situation. You have other people saying, no, I think it's okay as long as it's really, in the past, that sort of thing. So it was definitely good to get his perspective on that.
Yeah. I was also, like you said, I was surprised. It's almost, sometimes talking with people who do podcasts and are also in the management side of things, it's always interesting to see how quick on their feet these kind of people are, like when answering a question. I mean, we kind of threw them some curveballs, even with the, do you think people in bands come on, or, do some of these types of press avenues, outlets, whatever, and if the opportunity presents itself to maybe say something that they know might catch a little media attention because of it. And it was interesting to see him kind of be like, no, I think that'd kind of be a detriment to someone's career if they're hoping that's what they can do.
Yeah, I think that'd be really stupid, yeah.
Because, I sometimes feel like when you read some of these quotes and shit, you're like, this person like, sort of like, well, if this person asks this thing, like, I'm not really going to hold back. Like, because I mean, like, there just seems like there would be some some forethought, like when someone asks you a question, instead of being like, "Ugh," and then just saying whatever comes to mind, that you'd be like, well, there's the thought I have, and then there's a better way I could articulate it and not, shit on somebody in the process.
Yeah, I think what it is that there's people that, I mean, there might be some people that try to do it intentionally, but I think what we're really running into now is because of these types of outlets like podcasts. Like, as a podcast, we try to make people feel comfortable, talking with us, and you kind of relax, because it's not like doing a press interview where you're, sitting down and somebody's holding a microphone up to your face and saying, "What do you think about this?" We're more like, "Hey, man, sit down, have a beer. How's it going?" And it's just kind of a chill atmosphere. And I think that's when quotes like that tend to jump out, because you kind of forget that you still are doing a legitimate media thing. And so I think sometimes people's strong opinions about things just kind of come out. And at that point, it's like, oh, there might be some regret after it posts, or after you get quoted or something. But I think
Right.
I think with a lot of these guys, I don't think it's intentional. I think it's just kind of a lack of forethought, maybe dropping the guard a little bit too much on having an opinion that maybe isn't going to go over too well.
Yeah. I definitely think it was really interesting, and a little fun aside. Tubi over at the Talk to Me podcast talked to him shortly after we did, so very much looking forward to hearing their conversation together and seeing what similarities occur between the two.
He's gonna Blasko us. It's gonna be identical. It's gonna be the same. Yeah, he texted me too. He's like, "Yeah, dude." He was like, "That guy's pretty much up in the middle of the night doing all these. It's a weird time to do a press day,
Yeah.
Just be like, yeah, I'll just do all my let's see, 1:00 in the morning seems great. Let's go ahead and do that." But he's probably, I don't know, are touring musicians at that level jet lagged? Like, do you think he even get? I should have asked him that. Hey man, how jet lagged are you right now?
Well, I was going to say, where's Chae? Well, I do know from listening to some other podcasts and having friends who do some international touring, something they always say is, like, when you get over there, the first thing you should do is just try to make it through their day, so that way when you finally go to sleep, you're on their schedule of sleeping. However, when you're probably jet setting and going and playing all these random festivals wherever, and you're probably either on a bus or a private plane, at a level of with Ozzy, you're probably at the point where you're catching sleep where you can, and, although the thing that kind of got me was he said he was going to play a show. So, I mean, at that point, it's like, okay, like, is he going to take a nap maybe before the day, or had he just played a show, like you were potentially saying, then maybe he's, like, all wound up from playing a show, and it's like, yeah, give me the press, because, like, I'm going to be up for the next handful of hours anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. There had to have been some sort of caffeinated thing involved. I can't imagine it any other way, because, I mean, it was when we talked to him, it was like bright daylight, mid-afternoon, whenever I was, where I'm sitting here in St. Louis, and, like, he was more awake than I was.
I think that's a great segue to our show sponsor, the Bean Bastard Coffee. If you like caffeinated beverages that'll keep you awake for interviews, for your job, whatever it is you need to drink coffee for, head over to thebeanbastard.com. Buy you some excellent roasted coffees. You can check out the Life Preserver, which has got the Back to the Future thing to it. All these things are really great, and they're like kind of 80s pop culture themed. My favorite everyday drink out of the few coffees I got is the Panama Blend, which obviously is Van Halen inspired, and the good one I like to drink on Saturday morning so far is the Robo Cup. It's the espresso one, and definitely it gives you a little extra,
a little kick.
Yeah.
Like a robotic cop is kicking you.
It gives you a Danny LaRusso crane kick to start your morning.
Nice.
I had to keep it on. Brand. But yeah, I want to give a big thanks to show sponsor, The Bean Bastard. You can find them at thebeanbastard.com, like I said. You can also check them out on Facebook and Instagram at The Bean Bastard. If you follow them, the newest post as of today, Nick actually got the lady who played Slimer to hold the like the Ghostbusters blend type one that he used. I don't remember what it was called, but it was a
Very
pretty big
cool.
deal. Yeah. So follow them, and you get to see all kinds of crazy things. He utilizes a lot of props from like Ghostbusters toys and a lot of toys from the 80s, and it's a good time, and it's a good product, and support them because they support us over here at the podcast. And where can people find you, Dan?
Oh, well, you could find me at I'm at Discuss Metal Dan on Twitter. You can find me under plain old Daniel Terry on Facebook. And I am working on the Instagram thing, I promise. But you can also find everything else that I'm doing with my other podcast, Discography Discussion, at discussmetal.com or facebook.com/discography discussion.
And if you would like to keep up with Blasko, you can simply do it at Blasko1313. And as he said in the episode, he has a tree link that basically will take you to all of his various socials that he wants to plug. Twitter, also Blasko1313. And if you would like to keep up with everything that I'm doing here on the podcast, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at John's Entitled Podcast. Tweet at me at John's Entitled Pod, and email me at johnsentitledpod@gmail.com. There is a website. It is technically live-ish. If you would like to go check it out, see what's going on, maybe give me some suggestions on what you'd like to see over there, you can head over to www.johnsentitledpod.com. And for our partners over at Moshpit Nation, you can find them at moshpitnation.com. Find them on Facebook at Moshpit Nation West, capital M-I, and Instagram and Twitter are simply Moshpit Nation. And we're going to end this episode, as we always do, with a song. And as you heard Blasko pick, he wanted us to end it out with Bark at the Moon by Ozzy Osbourne, for obvious reasons. And yeah, so we're going to do that. I want to thank Dan for coming on and co-hosting this episode with me.
Anytime. That's what I'm here for.
And going forward, you will hear a lot more of Dan on this. As you will hear, I'm going to release the quick little pilot-y type thing of Dan and I talking about him coming on as a co-host, and you will start hearing him more often on some of these upcoming episodes. So without further ado, this is Ozzy Osbourne, Bark at the Moon.